Mm-hmm. Can we talk about socks? I love knitting socks. The vast majority of my yarn stash is sock yarn, over 100 skeins at last count, which is why I've been doing my personal ongoing stash busting project. I'm constantly finding excuses to knit more socks. Get down! There's a cat running around here who would like my yarn, so I'm going to put this down while we talk. I understand the kitty mind. It's like, why are you waving it around? Why are you playing with it when you know that I just want to eat it? But the thing is that when I came downstairs, she was upstairs asleep. And now both she and her sister are roaming around, and they've got a bit of a bad attitude going on. So if you hear any kind of crashing or banging or anything like that, it's probably a cat. Anyhow, there's a lot of tutorial videos out there on how to knit socks. This series isn't one of them. Instead, what I want to do is take a long-term experiential look at all the ways we knit socks, or even make socks, because you can crochet socks and knot-bind socks and even use a circular sock machine. There's lots of ways to make socks. So this is going to take a while, which is fine because I generally always have a sock on the needles. I even made my very own personal Yarn of the Month club out of stash, and it's heavily weighted in favor of socks. So this is going to be a very sock-heavy year, because as much as I love knitting socks, I also love collecting sock yarn. Convenient, eh? Now, I generally knit my socks magic loop style on a single 32-inch or 2.5 millimeter circular needle. This one's probably the best one that's going to get picked up by the camera. And as you can see, I have a lot of needles. Usually I use Addi or Skasel needles, though I've been known to try other brands and other kinds. So yeah, I've got a lot of 2.5 millimeter circulars of various sizes. I found my preferred sock knitting style very early, but there have been new innovations in sock knitting over the past 20 years, so maybe I'm missing out on something. Maybe I need to try new tools and new construction methods, boldly go where no single sock knitter has gone before. I mean, while I find it fun, there's probably more to life than magic looping vanilla socks with 20 round knit 2 purl 2 cuffs and a flap heel, right? Right? So I'm going to do some explorations, try some new to me tools, try some new to me construction, and see if maybe I've been missing out on something. Hi. Maybe we'll find a better fit or a method that works better for me. Maybe I'll find that I actually prefer double-pointed needles, or DPNs for short, to circular needles. Probably not. But I'd like to give these things a try, and I'm going to take you along with me, and I figure out we can talk about some of the possibilities, even though I've already started. I recently uploaded a video about my experience with DPNs, and you can find it up there somewhere. It went better than I expected. Am I totally giving up my circs for DPNs? Probably not, but I'm glad that I gave it a try. I started knitting about 20 years ago, somewhere around 2005, 2006. At one point, I fell in love with a pair of socks on Knitty.com. I think it was Hedera by Cookie A. And so I went about finding a website that would walk me through the basics of sock knitting so I could give it a try. Bear in mind, I just graduated from things like iPod cozies and toques to hand warmers around that time. My mom, whose first love wasn't knitting but sewing, told me that socks could be hard, particularly turning the heel. That sounds like a challenge to me. The first socks I knit were on DPNs, if memory serves, or rather, the first attempts were on DPNs, which I very quickly realized I didn't like very much. I heard that Kat Bordy had a book called Socks Soar on 2 Circular Needles, but I couldn't find it in any of my local yarn stores. Again, I went to the internet, and my searches for socks and circular needles led me to Magic Loop. I also found the bare bones information on Kat Bordy's method. Later, I found her book, New Pathways for Sock Knitters, and it was really interesting for showing all sorts of new ways to cover a foot. Like, there's all kinds of different construction methods in here. It's fantastic. So I not only have a lot of 32-inch circulars because I've managed to bend some of the needles and cables and wear away the nickel plating over the years, I also have a couple of pairs of 16-inch circs for the 2 socks on 2 circs method. I also have some longer circular needles for trying 2 at a time, both using magic loop or 2 circular needles. I've tried toe up, I've tried cuff down, I've done ribbed cuffs, I've done fold over cuffs, I've tried different heel constructions, some with flaps, some with short rows, some with both. I've knit from patterns, I've knit from memory, and I always default back to the exact same vanilla sock because I think that's just the first real pattern I was able to commit to my memory. So what I want to do today is sit down and make a plan. We'll go over some of the tools I have in my personal inventory, mostly these, some of the techniques I know about, and we'll put together a list of things to try. I'd also like to make a list of questions to ask myself as I'm knitting these socks, as well as after I'm done. I figure there will probably be videos about the socks as they're being knit, but in the end I want to take the information from our exploration and maybe do one large video ranking each of the sock experiences. I know it sounds extremely ambitious, but I have a pretty sizable sock yarn stash, which, let's be honest, is never getting down to 0 because I'm always going to find more skeins I've fallen in love with. But I want to give this a try. If you noticed I've missed a technique or a set of tools that you think I should try, you can always leave me a comment. Same if you know of a pattern that might fit some of the criteria I'm looking for, like maybe you know a really nice pattern with a fleagle heel you think I might like. Or maybe you know a better way to do short rows. Honestly, fleagle heel is just really fun to say. While you're leaving a comment, you might want to boop the like button and maybe check to make sure you're subscribed to the channel. As always, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters and channel members because these videos don't get made without your generous support. If you'd like to join my personal craft coven, channel memberships are down below, or if you're a Patreon sort of person, there's a link in the description. If memberships really aren't for you, that's okay. I'm just really glad you're here, and I hope you stay to the end of the video. Maybe watch another one when you're done. But back to recommending patterns or techniques to me. I generally don't have any kind of issues viewing the Ravelry website, so leaving the name of a pattern for me to look up is a-okay. I've turned off links in the comments where possible just for safety and anti-spam purposes, so I guess this is my way of asking you not to post links, because that goes directly in the spam trap and I don't really look at it. Here are the bulk of the tools that I have at my disposal, and yes, there's a lot of knitting needles in here because this is just how I organize my circular needles. I actually have a larger box with slots in it for putting these particular boxes into, and I have a whole bunch of different boxes for all the different sizes of circular needles that I've got. These are just the 2.5 millimeters or US 1.5s, and everything is labeled so that I can find it nice and easily. And for the most part, things don't go missing. For the most part, there is a set of needles that's gone missing and I might have to replace them, and that bugs me. But on the whole, I'm going under the assumption that I'm knitting with sock yarn and my usual 2.5 millimeter needle size, unless otherwise specified for whatever reason. So in here, somewhere, are 42-inch circular needles, I think, used for 2 at a time. That's 2 socks at a time. Also 32-inch circular needles, which you can use 2 of them at once for 2 at a time, or just one 32-inch circular needle for 1 at a time magic loop, which is my normal tools. 16-inch circular needles, and I have at least 2 of those for socks on 2 circular needles, single socks. There's 9-inch circular needles, like this little wee guy. These have been a capital T thing for a few years now, and I think I've also got another one somewhere around here that is, I think, a Haya needle. These are Chowgoos. But I remember another pair that had like a green cable, so I'm not sure whether those got misplaced or if I wound up giving them to a friend when I realized that these don't particularly work with the way I knit. But for the purposes of our experiments, I can probably switch to another knitting method temporarily because I didn't always I didn't always lever knit. Putting these things away is a pain in the butt. So I also have a few different brands of circular needles. You might have noticed me mention not only my Addies, but also Chowgu, Haya. There's a red pair of Knit Pros in here, Knitter's Pride. There's some wooden ones, I believe. There's some wooden Chowgus, some Knitter's Pride Dreams. I think I've got maybe one or two of those. There's at least one that's made of carbon fiber. I know that there was another one that was made of carbon fiber that I actually broke. So mileage may vary. Plenty of bamboo in here. So in addition to my circular needles, sets of 4 or 5 double-pointed needles, I just used these. I definitely prefer the Addi flip sticks to my super pointy stiletto signatures. That said, DPNs are not my favorites, but knitting a full pair of socks with them has definitely made me more proficient in their use. I find it easier to knit with 4 DPNs and keep the 5th for the gusset. I also have a pair of Addi Flexi Flips, not seen here because they have gone missing. These are the ones that are bugging me. Needles that mash together circulars and DPNs. I've heard good things about them. And Addi Crazy Snake, spelled C-R-A-S-Y, snake. And they're wavy DPNs. I saw these at the yarn store, and I'm sure a little WTF bubble appeared over my head, so these will be very interesting to try out. I also have a Bear Valley 3D printed knitting machine from Sound Yarn and Fibre, which I keep saying that I want to play with it. I just never have the time to do it. So that's definitely on the list of things to do. I know there's going to be a few perks and a few drawbacks right from the very beginning, so the circular needles are going to need less babysitting because part of the sock is always going to be tied to the needle. So there's less likelihood of me accidentally dropping a needle and having it fall to the floor or somehow fly across the room. And yes, these are things that have happened to me with double-pointed needles. I recently finished the second sock of my pair made with DPNs, and I dropped the right-hand working needle on a few occasions. And for those of you who are just getting caught up, I play Final Fantasy XIV with friends who are playing through the game for the first time. And I'm leveling a new character alongside them so I can re-experience the story and act as a kind of guide. Also, it's easier to find a group if you need one when most of your party is leveling together. So there's a lot of little movies that move the story along, and one of my friends and I knit through the movies, and I'm clumsy. So I know of at least one occasion where we were about to fight a big bad critter, and I dropped a needle right before the fight started. Luckily, there's a brief stopping point about halfway through that fight where they've inserted a little bit of dialogue exposition by one of the bad guys, and I was able to get up and find my needle. Not because I was knitting during the fight, which could have been interesting, but rather difficult, but because I didn't want to lose the needle, or step on it when I got up, or have a cat decide to play with it and bat it under the furniture where I wouldn't be able to get to it unless I had a broom or something. But until that point in the fight, whenever possible, I was occasionally leaning down from my chair or moving it back and shining the light from my phone flashlight around on the floor and trying to locate it, which probably would have been really funny to someone watching who isn't me. I know the cats wondered why I was contorting myself all over the place. So, known drawback to anything using multiple needles and no cable attachment, easy to lose if you're clumsy or inattentive, point for circular needles. And then there is the elephant in the room that is the circular sock machine, or CSM. It's hard to beat a machine that'll make a pair of vanilla socks in an afternoon, possibly even less time than that. Now, I don't have a ribber for the machine, and yes, that sounds dirty when you say it, right? But the sock machine didn't come with one, and I think Rachel at Sound Yarn and Fibre mentions somewhere in their social media that they're working on developing it. So I have no idea if the Bear Valley CSM is compatible with, say, the Dean and Bean sock knitting machine, and thus could procure one from there. But I would rather that all of my CSM's parts came from the same place. Particularly also because I believe in supporting the business that I've been working with rather than going to a third party. So unless I manually pre-make the cuffs, if cranking cuff down, or cast off and manually knit the ribbed cuff, if cranking toe up, then I'm looking at what's called, I think, a hung cuff. I'm still new to this. So unless I'm just using the machine to crank tubes for my socks, I'm a little limited as to what cuffs, heels, and toes to use. So while I'm sure there's a lot of cool things I can do with the CSM, it's probably not going to win the day for versatility. But socks in 1 or 2 days? Definitely a leg up if you're looking for new socks fast. So how are we going to organize all of this? Well, like I said, I just sort of forged ahead and did the double point needle video without any kind of solid metrics, and whoops, that's a bad on my part. I'd like to make the socks comparable, but not necessarily all the same, and I don't necessarily want to make the same video over and over just with different needles. Now, obviously there's a huge difference between, say, knitting a heavily patterned sock to knitting a plain sock, but plain socks can be very different as well. Referencing Kat Bordy's New Pathways for Sock Knitters shows all sorts of ways to navigate cuffs, heels, and toes. There's also a lot of other heel methods out there, both for toe up and cuff down. I think I've even got a PDF of all of the sock knitting methods that are in Weldon's Practical Needleworking from like the 1800s, so that's something to consider as well. So what I'm thinking of doing is figuring out what kind of sock it's going to be first, generally toe up or cuff down. Maybe every so often do a palette cleanser with a different method. I know my friend Claude has a pattern for seamed socks that she's enjoyed. I might have to try tracking down that pattern or see if there's something similar in my own vintage stash. I'm pretty sure I have a pattern for seamed argyle socks somewhere in storage that needs to be dug out eventually. Never know, I might be able to trade for it. Have any of you watched my fellow Canadian YouTuber Michelle Jasek? Michelle's near the start of her knitting experience, but she's well known for crochet and sometimes makes granny squares with a little help from her D&D dice. Basically, takes something like an 8, 10, or 20-sided die and assigns different colors to the numbers. That way, if she needs a granny square with 4 color changes, she rolls the dice 4 times for her combo. I'm thinking of doing a twist on this. Nothing elaborate, just take a list of heel techniques, maybe add in some outlying construction like the techniques in the New Pathways book, since I have it here and the basic patterns don't rely on standard construction, and assign the appropriate size die to the amount of techniques. I could see flipping a coin to determine toe up or cuff down. Once that's determined, roll the die. If the coin flip isn't compatible with the die roll, for instance, toe up with a Dutch heel, probably isn't going to work very well, we'd get a reroll. From there, it's figuring out which tool to use. I think I'll leave that up to whim. Some of the tools will probably only be used once or twice. I can't see myself naturally gravitating to double-pointed needles unless a pattern really calls for them. So unless I'm really into the Addy Flexi Flips, for instance, if I can find them, I'll probably try those once or twice, give my thoughts on them, and put them aside in favor of tools I feel more comfortable with. The 9-inch circulars, for instance, will probably get used once, twice, maximum, mostly because I have a feeling they're best suited for cuff down or toe up with a short row heel. Toes might be a bit of a challenge, just due to the nature of the 9-inch circular needle. Of course, I could be very wrong, so feel free to educate me down in the comments. Be that as it may, I'll try to note when I've retired a set of needles. Also, if you guys come up with any heel constructions I've missed and we've either retired some heels or gained enough more to increase the size of the die, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, and we'll note that down as well. I can see I'm probably going to need to keep a notebook about this experience. Well, it's not like I have a shortage of notebooks. Like pretty much everybody else who's an undiagnosed neuroatypical person, I've got a stack of unused notebooks. What metrics should we be looking at? Well, availability, definitely. What are you going to need to do to get the tools? Can you find them at your local yarn or big box craft store? Do you need to special order them? Usability and learning curve. How comfortable is it to use the tools? Do you need to use any specific knitting method to use them, or is the tool possibly optimized with a particular method, be it English or continental style, lever knitting, or otherwise? How easy or challenging is the basic sock construction? That is, casting on, knitting the body, and knitting the heel and toe. That's before taking into account any kind of decorative features like repeating patterns, lace, cables, etc. that might have been chosen. Again, probably at my whim if I'm needing a change from relatively plain stockinette. For instance, working with the double-pointed needles I just finished with was challenging at first. Getting things cast on was more work than I'm used to. Second sock went a bit faster than the first. Once I figured out how many needles I preferred to work with, things sped up a lot, but it still took a lot longer than usual to get through a sock. At least that was my perception. It lends itself really well to lever knitting, and as long as you can get the empty needle to your right hand in a good amount of time, it can be done almost continuously without long pauses. Purling, particularly towards the end of the needle, was extra awkward, as was turning and purling back for the heel flap. Picking up heel stitches along the flap wasn't too bad, but there was always the possibility of losing a needle. I dropped the right-hand working needle on the floor at least twice, and multiple times in my lap on the sofa. That said, it's very mobile because you don't have to worry about twisting a cable. I also noticed that my gauge was different on the second sock. The gauge was a lot closer to what I usually have. This is also the most successful I've been at keeping the cats away from my knitting, probably due to all the pointy bits. I still prefer my circulars though, and I feel like I'm blazing through the emergency backup socks, the ones I was working on at the beginning, when I get the opportunity to knit on them. So those are some of the kinds of observations I think I'll be looking for. I want to be able to compare the different techniques, so I probably won't use a lot of patterns unless they meet the criteria of the Greater Sock Challenge and aren't terribly expensive, because I come from a generation of knitters where most of the viral sock patterns were, for the most part, free patterns, not the heavily monetized model a lot of newer knit designers seem to be embracing, where if you make a small change or hack to the pattern, it's an excuse to charge an extra $6 to $10. Yeah, that's not going to happen. But that's my plan for this grand sock experiment. What do you think of the whole idea? Do you have any recommendations for tools or techniques I might have missed? I know I probably could get really granular when it comes to toes and cuffs, but I figure we'll keep things relatively simple for now. I'm at the point with my April Mystery socks, my Neuromancer socks, at least in my mind, where they need a bath and some soak and some time spent on the blockers. So I'm pretty sure the next pair of socks, the next non-emergency backup pair of socks, will go in the needles soon. Spoilers for those of you following my Stashbusting series, I've been working on a project from the UFO bin. I don't know if it'll be done by the end of the month, as I have some sewing I need to get done, but crocheting during my evening video game time has been a definite change of pace. Anyhow, that's where I'm going to leave it for now. Thank you for spending some time with me as I talk this through, and I will see you in the next one. I just bought the last pair of 2.5mm Addy Flexi Flips from Ancient Arts Yarns in Calgary, and I humbly apologize to anybody who might be looking for these, but mine have disappeared, and I have a hard time trying to figure out how this managed to go missing out of my stash of needles. I don't get it. But that said, they make a fantastic magic wand.